What really happened in Charlottesville, Virginia last year, 2017, by David Abraxas. Facebook post, Tuesday, August 15th, 2017 at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. University of Virginia campus, Charlottesville, Virginia, Saturday, 12 August 2017. Here's a quote as epigraph. There is nothing more terrible than a class of barbarian slaves who have learned to regard their existence as an injustice and now prepare to avenge not only themselves but all generations. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. Never in my vocation and life's work of chronicling human stupidity and human bullshit have I seen a bigger pile of bullshit and nonsense than the reportage in the news, all the news, including citizen journalists posting interviews and videos on YouTube and other internet sites regarding what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia the day before yesterday. The main march and protest by Unite the Right was not a protest in favor of white nationalism or white supremacy. It was a protest against white genocide and the organized, well-funded, and well-armed programs aiming to destroy European civilization, or the last vestiges of what's left of European civilization, of which the immigration movement and the removal movement are key strategies. I'm referring to the proponents and funding supporters of this true conspiracy, which include, but are not limited to, George Soros. The lies about the main march, not the two other earlier protests by avowed KKKers and Nazis, having anything directly to do with white supremacy, were due to the idiot media's conflation of the three events, of course, to get attention and sell advertising time, as are all of these creatures' motivations. The marchers never mentioned white supremacy or even white nationalism. This was all injected into the events by journalists and the disgusting American establishment, which includes the American people who are eager to believe whatever the establishment elites tell them to believe, for their own personal and group aggrandizement. The chant of the main marchers can be seen and heard in the Honest videos. Their main chant as they march to the protest site of Lee's Park, named after Confederate General Robert E. Lee, was, "You will not replace us. You will not replace us." Because what is happening in this country and throughout this civilization is what French writer René Camus and many other thinkers and writers who you will never hear from or about because of, you guessed it, establishmentarian control of the wire services and news reporting corporate conglomerates, has referred to as the Great Replacement, referring to what many in our civilization consider the purpose of the forced mass immigration into Western countries by non-Caucasian, non-European migrants fleeing failed states and failed societies in Asia, Africa, Central and South America, and the Third World in general, which are aimed ultimately at intermixing Caucasians out of existence. This is being forced on Western societies without any input from or approval by the majorities of people in any of these democracies, quote-unquote. Democracies, quote-unquote. Not only have the people not been asked whether they want this mass influx into their nation states, but most have already complained emphatically that they do not want this mass influx and have obviously been ignored. Initially, the Unite the Right marchers were protesting against actions around the nation perpetrated by the removal movement, who are endeavoring to remove statues, monuments, names, titles, words, ideas, concepts, in a true fulfillment of George Orwell's predictions about how a relatively healthy, sane society will be reduced via a series of freedom-curtailing steps into totalitarian dictatorship, and that some subsegments of the population have complained are offensive or hurt people's feelings. This removal movement is a hyped-up, hysterical, and borderline personality-distorted extension of the political correctness movement, which was already a hyped-up, hysterical, and psychotic initiative to begin with. The removal movement and enforcers of political correctness conformity. The removal movement and the enforcers of political correctness conformity mandates are both expressions of what certain 20th century philosophers have termed ressentiment. This term is the French version of our term resentment, but relates much deeper, more profound, but more ominous implications. The term suggests feelings of envy and jealousy of other persons or nations, concepts, or institutions on the part of other disturbed persons who suffer from such deep-seated feelings of inferiority and worthlessness in the face of the objects of their envy, that they are motivated to such powerful feelings of impotent narcissistic rage to the point that they would be willing to physically destroy their imagined enemies if they could, but resist or ignore these impulses since they are either not able or not willing to suffer the consequences of such actions that they fantasize about. Since people suffering from ressentiment of some other persons are forced by fear of actual physical or military or intellectual dominance, they are forced to repress this rage, which eventually is expressed in pressure cooker style in words and deeds drenched in self-deceiving ego defenses and overdetermined delusional systems of words and ideas related to revenge. Barack Obama's administration was a motivating force for these long-term strategies of Euro destruction. The ultimate goal for the 8 years of Obama's presidency was very specifically to erase the European achievement by erasing Europeans, not by military-enforced genocide, but by interbreeding them out of existence, a project that the United Nations has included in its official definition of genocide. Barack Obama's personal fantasies of revenge mirror the secret dream fantasies of all Negroes in America, which has been voiced publicly by masses of progressive socialist DNC types, leftists and communist leaders and strategists. If you intermix the races to the point where there are no longer any race distinction, then there's nobody to point to the invention of the telephone and say, wow, Europeans invented the telephone. What did you Africans invent to compare? Or, wow, Europeans invented spaceflight. What did you Asians invent to compare? And etc. This is a sickness that is highly contagious and is spreading, as would be expected, to all non-Caucasian, non-European races and ethnicities, and to American whites who suffer from severe liberalism, which is not a political orientation any longer, but a legitimate psychological disorder, fit for inclusion in future revisions of the DSM-5 or DSM-6, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the standard diagnostic reference tool for psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, social workers, and others of the clinical dispensation, unconsciously designed specifically to as palliative and self-medicate for feelings of guilt and self-disgust over the fact that they no longer believe in any God or no longer believe in any authentic morality or moral system, and are strategically employing a plastic pseudo-morality justified and buttressed by the idea of sticking up for and supporting the underdog as part of their overall self-medication strategy. Negroes today, in America and throughout the world, and non-whites in general, repress ressentiment toward Caucasian European society and culture for what they perceive as its superiority. I'm not saying that I believe Negroes are inferior, nor am I saying that I do not believe they are inferior. What I am saying is that they feel inferior, and you, regardless of who you are out there, believe they are inferior, and our Negroes do too. It's irrelevant whether or not blacks are inferior to whites. At their deepest, darkest subconscious depths, they believe they are inferior. It is branded into their subconscious racial memory and collective unconsciouses. It has actually taken the form of introjects and self-objects in the black psyche. If you don't know what introjects and self-objects are, do a little research on object relations theory and psychotherapy. They cannot escape from the historical psychological fact that they were made slaves by Caucasian Europeans, while Europeans weren't enslaved by anybody, but especially not by Africans. The facts that fuel their sense of inferiority. It is a hard, harsh reality to come to terms with, and so far they have failed to come to terms with it, and are now making it much worse by piling on complex ideas of denialism, rationalization, and other defense mechanisms, which will only make any future racial psychotherapy that much more difficult. The psychocultural damage from a heritage of slavery is permanent. No people can overcome a legacy of slavery. Look at my people, the Jews. We actually celebrate our legacy of slavery and have holidays to reminisce about it, which I believe is actually subcultural reaction formation. Subculture referring to our subculture of the Jews. But our celebrations are mere attempts at reaction formation, and we have been a destructive influence on Western civilization ever since that event because of our feelings of inferiority, which motivated our deep-seated desire for revenge against the Greeks, the Romans, the Germans, the Spaniards, and the West in general. This is the black predicament today, and this is what all the sum total of fuss is about. Reparations movements, removal movements, speech code movements, and political correctness in general, affirmative action schedules, diversity premiums, university and workplace quotas, attacks against the framers and founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson, with pseudo-moral resentment, revenge-motivated accusations of slavery, and on and on. They are in denial, as are their allies and supporters on the left, but the truth manages to seep through the cracks in these defense mechanisms, eventually and consistently. The idea that all civilizations, cultures, societies are equal is a rationalization which not one of its perpetrators believes for a nanosecond. They are forgetting some things they never knew in the first place. These retards know nothing about the history of science, intellectual history in general, the history of history, legal, religious, moral, or political history, nothing about the development of Western art or art in general, music, architecture. They are the great nihilist, know-nothing, postmodern, postmortem masses, the American herd, our nation's cow and cattle people. All the talk about white supremacy is diversionary. The fact of the matter is that every single person on this planet is a white supremacist, most particularly non-whites. Regardless of the verbally violent denials they will voice upon hearing this hypothesis. After such denials are voiced, the air will clear, and they will be forced to look around them and will be faced with the facts, undeniable. Everything they own, everything they value, millions more achievements and accomplishments they're too ignorant to know about or comprehend were all created by CEMs. What I call CEMs, Caucasian European males. You are a liar if you pretend not to be a white supremacist. The fact that all the non-whites around the world are trying to sneak in or into or force their way into white countries, and conversely no whites have any desire to live in non-white countries, is powerful evidence that cannot be explained away. They secretly realize that they are living in a fantasy world if they claim at the very least that white cultures and societies are not superior and supreme. Negro feelings of inferiority, every action and behavior of Negroes in America, Negro feelings of inferiority. Every action and behavior of Negroes in America has a subtext, and that subtext reads, how do I stop feeling inferior to whites? Black Lives Matter, cries of racism, using the race card, the term people of color, claims of white privilege, complaints of white supremacy, removal of Confederate monuments, the Black Hebrew, Black Israelite sect, groups promoting revisionist histories of ancient Egyptian societies, black supremacists and Afrocentrist groups, and on, are all desperate with failed attempts to create and or buttress black individual and racial self-esteem, and thereby to mask Negro self-hatred. Negroes suffer from self-esteem starvation because they believe whites are inferior and that European civilization is superior to their own, to whatever extent they ever achieved civilization in the first place. What specifically have Negroes contributed to European civilization or to world civilization? Scientifically, artistically, intellectually, spiritually, culturally. Basically three things: jazz, the blues, and the peanut. Now, I love the blues. I sing and play the blues myself whenever I am not forcing a taste of reality onto my fellow species members. I was raised on jazz and loved it since I was 12, and I like peanut butter immensely. But how does this compare with the cultural achievements of Caucasian European civilization? It doesn't. Nothing compares with the achievements, accomplishments, explorations, discoveries, and inventions of CEMs, Caucasian European males. In fact, I don't even have to say it, because even people who know absolutely nothing about intellectual or cultural history or history in general, which is everybody pretty much, knows this reality, is aware of this reality. We would have to travel outside of our solar system to find civilizations as culturally and intellectually advanced as that of Europe. I mean, culturally and intellectually advanced over all the competition on the planet. In other words, all non-white, non-European societies and civilizations. They invented tools like the sextant and the concept of maps to assist them in their navigations. Motivated by the Faustian impulse to know, to discover, to seek out, to overpower, and to overcome, consumed by heroic curiosity, daring death and danger, they explored and mapped the entire globe and the atmosphere and the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Hold on a minute. Nothing compares with the achievements, accomplishments, explorations, discoveries, and inventions of CEMs, Caucasian European males. In fact, I don't even have to say it, because even people who know absolutely nothing about intellectual or cultural history or history in general, which is everybody pretty much, knows this reality. We would have to travel outside of our solar system to find civilizations as culturally and intellectually advanced over their neighbors, over their competitors on their planet, as that of Europe over non-Europeans. European men studied the heavens and the stars. They learned to navigate from the stars. They invented tools like the sextant and the concept of maps to assist them in their navigations. Motivated by the Faustian impulse to know, to discover, to seek out, to overpower, and to overcome, consumed by heroic curiosity, daring death and danger, they explored and mapped the entire globe, the atmosphere of the globe, and the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau, among others, and discovered for the rest of humanity the fact that it is a globe in the first place. Most of the third world peoples in the world today who are overpopulating the world today only exist at all because of European discoveries in microbiology, genetics, epidemiology, medicine, irrigation and food production, social organization, and economic logic. No other cultures, societies, civilizations on Earth had anything whatsoever to do with these discoveries, inventions, or accomplishments. None. The reality that non-white peoples around the world are not yet strong enough spiritually and psychologically to face is that without white European men, they would all be living in grass huts in Africa or Indonesia eating rat meat steaks. That's the reality. Thank you for listening. That is the